Good morning, everyone. This is Kim Hyshka here from Dialogue Partners. I am being joined this morning by Signy Wilson, and I'm going to get her to introduce herself in a couple of moments here. But just let me sort of like bring you into the show, bring you into the conversation. I love impactful conversations. It's kind of what I'm on a quest to create more of in the world. And I've been having many amazing conversations with this lovely woman beside me here, Signy. And she's been thinking a lot recently about money and our relationship with money and the stories that we tell ourselves about money and how we work with it and when we work with it. And she's just been saying so many things that have really resonated with me. And so I was hoping to put it out into the world so that maybe some of you might also be caught a little bit by it. So I'm just going to turn it over for a moment. Signy, tell us about who you are, what you do, and maybe a little bit of what you love.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I always love being in any kind of conversation with you because you're right. Impactful is the key, and it's what we always have when we're in conversation. So you and I. So I appreciate this chance to have dialogue with you about it. A little bit about me. My name is Signy Wilson. I work as an executive coach. I'm a trainer, and I'm the creator of the Significant Living brand. And of course, you can see in there, Signy, Significant Living. Yes, I was born to do this. And which I didn't even know for many a year until I realized, like, hey, wait a minute, my name fits right in there. So, and so part of what along the lines of what you were saying about impactful conversations, I believe that the way to a significant life is through significant conversations. And so I love that we're going to have this conversation today and just get into something that I know is challenging for people. And I know, I know the more we talk about it, the more we can transform it. And so that's what I'm excited about for today and for our conversation.
So Signy, I just wanted to start with this, and then I've got a bunch of questions. I think why I'm really so pumped about this today is you and I were talking about this not so long ago, where I'm in a program right now, and I'm just doing some thinking about money and how does it sit with me. And so I had this picture that I needed to take about this. There's this concept called a money mountain, and it's all about, setting goals and direction for yourself. And I put a big number up there, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God. And then I had the moment of, so can I put that out into the world? Like, it was scary just for me to write it down. And then it was going to be something even scarier to share it with everybody else. And so so much stuff was bubbling up. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, maybe for anybody who's listening to the show right now, like what's this, just think of some of your own stories, some of the things that we tell ourselves when we're thinking about money, and just kind of hold that in your head while Signy and I have a bit of this conversation about money. So that's where I'm coming from today. That number is still sitting over here on my whiteboard, and it's still kind of stressing me out.
So winking at you.
Yeah, it's winking at me over there.
Well, thank you for saying that and for being real and that honest, because the thing is that not only do people generally I think the reason why people don't have a conversation around money is because we have that discomfort. We're taught not to talk about it, or not to stretch ourselves, or just not even to go there. And so I love your willingness to go there, and that we are going to have a deeper conversation about it today.
Okay. So Signy, when you think of money, like when people say, Signy, what do you know about money? Or just even when you hear people starting to talk around money, like what do you think about money? Or what is having money, not having money, working with money? What does all of that mean for you?
There's a lot of questions.
I know, right?
Well, because there's a lot of questions about money. I think that's a truth for so many of us. The thing that I would say about money, I'm going to start by talking about my relationship with money, or how I see money. When I think about money, I really see it as something, it's like, it's there to serve me. And it's like, its job is to make my life better. And, it's like I'm in charge of it, as opposed to like I'm at its mercy. And I think that's a really important distinction. I'm sure we'll talk in a minute about how other people experience money. And I think this is pretty deliberately different. I have a story about when I was in university, and I took a business degree. for a variety of reasons I won't go into that aren't important to this conversation. But one of the things they made us do during Frosh Week is they made us dress up in this silly little outfit and march around town chanting, "We love money." And of course, I think it was intended to have us feel like a little bit awkward, a little bit silly, or a little bit whatever. But I was like, yeah, that's actually a really good way to feel about money. Like, we love money. Nothing wrong with money. Money is like a powerful tool that we can use in service of our dreams and creating a life we want and creating a world we want. So why not love money, as opposed to what's the alternative? Hate money? Be afraid of money? Like, no. Let's love money. It's a better way to go.
Yeah. Oh, I have so many questions. I have so many questions. Okay. Before I just kind of jump on the, when you think of that, I mean, that's some of your story, or that's your experience around it. When you think of, or when you're working with clients or friends or family, colleagues, what are the common stories you hear other people tell you about money?
Well, I mean, it's a whole range of things. The feelings around it tends to be things like fear and hesitation, doubt, anxiety, this whole sort of like money is almost the enemy, or it's a threat. It's something they've got to try to manage, or, it sort of looms over them, and it's got this kind of quality of almost like in a job, a micromanager in a job, and it's running the show, and they're trying to, they're feeling at the mercy of it, or it's even now I don't have words for it. They're like fraught with this kind of like, ugh, it's like, ugh.
Yeah. The same thing. I think the same thing that I had when all of a sudden I looked at something, and maybe I'll put in my own stuff, Signy. Maybe you tell me if this is other people's stories. I had this, how are people going to judge me? I had the, do I deserve that? Is that okay for me? Like, there was those, I had a range, but those are the first ones that come to mind.
Like, is it okay for me to want that? Is it okay for me to be open and honest about the fact that I want that? Exactly right. Will I be judged? Will I be different from others? Like, it's not as prevalent in our society as in some other societies, but the whole tall poppy syndrome, like, you don't want to stand out above others because then you'll be cut down. And so there's something for a lot of people where they try to minimize or make sure they're not different from, and allowing ourselves to have big money goals, or even have a healthy relationship with money, or even talk about money, are all ways in which we are standing out from other folks.
Yeah.
And yet how many people say, like, how many people want to be a 7-figure I work in the world of coaching. How many people want to be a 7-figure coach like Tony Robbins, right? Like, everybody in the back of the mind is dreaming that, but refusing to admit it or talk about it or even like look at it.
Yeah. So this is something that strikes me a little bit, Signy, as you're talking about this, is that, where, my world of conversations and your world of significant living and conversations, here coming together, is that, so how about this? I've got a bit of this principle, and I think this came from my parents, not entirely sure. Maybe I've created it on my own. It's okay to talk about big money when you know other people make more than you. Right? Somehow there's this, like, I feel like this is a thing in our culture where we all kind of have some general sense of people's monetary wealth.
Right.
And I've always kind of had this thing of, well, as long as I know they have more money than me, it's okay for me to talk about where I want to go and what I want to achieve. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that.
I love that. I love that, because it ties into this piece about how, like, not wanting to stand out or be at risk, or, I mean, for me, the piece, and I was raised with this as well, and I go into this a little bit because I had two models to choose from, right? My mother was raised in poverty. My father had resources. And so in the world where I was a child, it was a little bit about trying to understand that, like, the difference between those two and what that meant for me. But there is something about, we get uncomfortable talking about money. We get uncomfortable when, for me and for what I've seen and from my childhood, about making other people uncomfortable. Like, if I'm the person with the most money, then how will the other people feel? Will they be awkward, or, oh, well, she's lording it around, or, who does she think she is? And, like, rubbing my nose in the fact that I don't have it and she does.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. And of course, I know other people that have that same thing. They may not have put the words to it. Like, there's such a shroud of discomfort, secrecy, whatever around money that a lot of people won't even talk about what you're talking about right now. Like to say it and to be that honest.
Yeah. Yes. And what really jumps out for me is just how much that holds us back.
Yeah.
Because sort of listening to you tell your story about, my mom grew up in poverty and my dad grew up with resources, there's this tension out there, and there's some real linkage between people who are good and people who are bad, and if they have and they don't have, and when we do have, what does that make us to people who don't have? Like there's so much that I feel needs to be cracked into, and yet we just don't say anything at all because we don't know how, or we don't know what's going to happen.
Well, we don't know how, and we feel the anxiety, right? Like, because a lot of what I see around this, when I sort of look at the impact on people when they're looking at money in this way, that it's, that they're at the mercy of money, the impact is that people, they tend to feel, less joy, less alive, all those kind of things, because they're busy thinking they're like in that negative mind frame. But it's also what I see is so much shame around money. Like shame around money, and then feeling alone around that shame because they're not sharing, they're not talking about it because of the shame. I shouldn't talk about it. It'll make other people uncomfortable. Like that whole, it's this thing that comes down. So even the things that you're listing there that you're talking about, like we don't let ourselves peek into the black box of money because we don't want, we don't want to feel uncomfortable. We don't want other people to feel uncomfortable. We've been trained and taught not to. It's very complicated and tricky and convoluted. And so people just go, yeah, let's just put that aside.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's just go back to how we've been trained for a moment. I want to go back to you shared earlier. You had as a child, you had a couple of models to choose from, and I know that you've told me some stories in the past about, I believe, your mom and your grandmother, and some of the things that you learned as a child watching them and sort of what they put out into the world. So maybe just take us back a little bit to a younger Signy, and kind of walk us through some of what happened in your childhood and some of what you learned or what you're taking with you as you continue to grow.
Love that. So I'll go back to the first thread, this thing about my mother grew up in poverty and my father had resources, and it created a little bit of confusion for me. And actually, when I was a kid, I thought we were quite impoverished. I thought we didn't have a lot of money. And so the two examples that I have of that is when I was little, my brother and I needed bedside tables, and my mother went and bought this one thing that wasn't quite a bedside table. It was too long for a bedside table, and she cut it in half and made it a bedside table for both of us. And I remember my thought was like, wow, we must really not have a lot of money that she had to buy one and divide it up for us. We can't actually afford two, we can only afford one. What I didn't realize until much later was it was just, I think they only had one size. My mom is wildly creative. She's so good at making things and doing things. And so she was like, well, that doesn't need to stop me. I'm just going to create two out of this. Like, she was having fun. Here I was going like, and she was like, no, this is fantastic. I get to enjoy myself. So, that was one story. And then the other story I have in my youth was that when I was, my dad loved Dairy Queen. And one time I remember going to Dairy Queen, and my father said to me, what would you like, dear? And I was like, oh, I'd really like to have a peanut butter parfait, but they're so expensive, as compared to, say, a cone. And my dad was like, he looked at me, he laughed, and he said, honey, it's okay. I'm the last of the big time spenders. And like, I took it totally at face value. I was like, oh, wow, they are really expensive, but he's willing to splurge on me. I'm so lucky. Like, that's how I saw it. Not that he was like, oh, honey, we can afford a peanut butter parfait for you. And so there's a way that I had this, I was confused about our relationship with money as a family. But years later, well, I already told you the one story about when I was at university, but years later, I realized there are these two options. Like, I have a scarce, impoverished sort of version that my mother had. And then I had this other version that my father had about, actually, money is available. You can be generous with money. You can create more money. And I chose, because I could have chosen either one of these, I chose my father's perspective. Because in the moment it was like, I think that's going to serve me more. And since I have an option, I'm going to choose this way to look at money. Because yes, there's the facts of money, like how much money we make and what our, what we have to spend and all that kind of stuff. But there's also the attitude or the mindset we have to money. And I think that's almost more important, because that then creates the behaviors that create, what we actually do with money, how we make it, how we spend it, et cetera.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, Signy, if you were going to sort of break down a little bit how one mindset is different from the other, because I'm trying to try it on for size right now, right? I'm trying to think so what's the mindset I would need to have if I wanted to sort of take on I'm the last of the big time spenders? And I say that jokingly, but what do you see as sort of some of the mindset that sits behind that?
Yeah, great. There's a couple different elements to it. Like to my mind, it's a lot about, it's about generosity. It's about trust. It's about trusting money. It's about trusting other people with money. It's about being willing to risk. Like there's kind of a freedom or an openness, as opposed to the other mindset, which is scarce. It's kind of holding it tightly. It's, there's an anxiety. There's I can't trust other people. I can't you can see it in my, my energies like this versus this, right? And in this open one, we see it in so many different places, like the concept of tithing. Like tithing is about giving a % of your money to somebody, regardless of how much money you make, like to a church or to a charity or to an organization, because it's trusting that we have enough. And that's a big thing to ask, like trusting we have enough if you don't have a lot. Right. And yet it's a perspective you can have regardless of how much money you have. Yeah. Does that give you, I could go on and on. So does that give you kind of a handle on it?
Yeah, I like that idea about trusting we have enough. And because I feel like, Signy, this has got to happen to all of us. There's got to be moments of where we believe it and we feel it and we're like, okay, like it really strikes me as this kind of like openness, and instead of like hanging on to stuff so tight, it's that idea of like sometimes you need to let things go in order for them to come back. Mm-hmm. Signy, what's your advice or what's your guidance on when you lose it, like when you lose the trust that you've got enough, or suddenly it's slipped away and you can feel that tightening coming again?
Oh, it's so great.
Yeah. What's your advice on how do you find it again? How do you find that trust?
Well, and it's funny because at first I thought you were going to say, how do you manage it when you lose the money? Right?
Oh, and then you said when you lose question too.
Well, it's a different question, and it's the same question because they're connected. Like our inner world creates our outer world. So if we are in that place where we're like tight and anxious and in that place, then money is going to respond, right? Like because money is just energy, right? Money is energy. It's the external version of energy. So our internal relationship with money, our internal energy around money is like, oh, then money, the external manifestation of that is also going to go, oh, and it's going to dry up. Versus when we're like, okay, like I know it's going to be okay. I believe that we can get through this. I believe we can get through this has a limited quality to it, versus like money is an energy and it flows. I can stand in the stream of money. This isn't done. I can't get it wrong. Mm. Like it's mentally choosing to open.
Yeah.
Right. And it's and energetically, and in some cases your heart, like even the difference between when we're like this versus when we're like this, because from here we can receive money, energy, love, like flow, all of it. Here we wouldn't even be able to see it if it came our way, because we're so locked in, right? We're so in a different space. God, even the light behind me suddenly got all dark. I saw it on camera versus lit up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of, I'm thinking some of my own personal experiences, and I can for sure pinpoint a few times where I was so tightly either focused and I think scared. I think that there's a combination of those two things. Like I'm so have to hang on to this that, an opportunity flies right past. And because you're down here, you're not even aware enough to pull yourself out. And then I'm thinking about a contract, that I had once. And I was working with the client, and I was, they were a great client. I really loved working for them and with them. I was trying to cultivate it. And I was so worried about, crap, if I lose this contract, how am I going to pay my bills next month? Like, am I going to be able to afford my staff payroll? Yes, very, hanging on to that. Meanwhile, there was, and of course you never see it until 2 months later, some great opportunities, people who like, hey, can we hang out? Or I'd really love to pick your brain on this. But I was like, no, I can only do this, and I only have time for this. Right. But then afterwards, I found out actually that they were also really great contracts and opportunities, but I didn't hear about them until actually somebody else was helping those two organizations. And so it just strikes me that, yes, I hear you on that. I was so focused on this, and it was a good focus. It was serving, it was, or how about this? It was a well-intended focus.
That's a good distinction.
Didn't create the results that I was hoping for.
Right. Because when you were saying it was a good focus, that's one of the problems. Like we're putting blinders on. We're saying, well, I'm focused. And so that's what's good. I'm focused on getting this handled. I'm focused on, but as you say, we lose that peripheral vision. We lose the other opportunities. We lose the chance to see it from a bigger picture, from a meta view. Because that's some of what we're doing when we're creating the possibility of seeing it from a larger perspective and recognizing that this one paycheck or this one, dollar, this one opportunity is not what it all hangs on. It's actually about how do we be more connected to life. And from there's more opportunity, inevitably, because there are so many opportunities, and it's about connecting to those.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I know I'm going a little esoteric here, a little on the woo-woo, but
It's okay. Sometimes we need the woo-woo in order to sort of see like how it lands and then how it actually materializes into tangible, into tangible reality. Maybe I was going to tell a quick story, Signy, and I was totally channeling my inner Signy yesterday where there was, and it's a little bit about money, but I think it's about this bigger thing about, believing that there is more out there, and that putting that energy into the world, and more will come. I was doing a talk yesterday with a group, and we were hoping that there was going to be 100 people there. 25 people showed up, and I could have had the like, oh, it's not what I expected. Okay. So I'm just, and then sort of have that real disappointment attached to it. And instead I sort of chose you know what? There are 25 amazing people that are here. And so I'm going to be open and sort of bring my best to this group. And sure enough, at the end of that session, another person came up and was like, hey, we've got this way larger community, and we'd really love to bring your message to this larger community. So it strikes me that this story that you're talking to us about today, trusting we have enough, sort of standing in the stream of money, it's relevant to money, and it's actually relevant to opportunity in sort of whatever space that you're in.
And I love that, because an example of the very activist closing in and the fear and the whatever around money, we is just the word money, versus if we were to say the word impact or the word opportunity, those are actually more open energies than money, opportunity, impact, all of those pieces. And that's what I'm going to be looking at in my mastermind program. I'm actually going to be having people like shifting not just their relationship to money, but actually shifting, all of it to impact, to opportunity, to, the significance they're having in the world, because that's what it is that's going to lead to more income, more opportunity, more money, all of it. But we need to go from this constrained, anxious, fear, shame-based model into one where it's like we're willing, we're receiving, we're allowing, and we're connected to everything that's happening.
Cool. Okay. So Signy, maybe how about this? Give us a taster, or give us I feel like you could I'm certainly wildly curious. If you were going to give me just a couple ideas around how to build a more positive money story or a more positive relationship with money, what are some things that you can share with me or to anybody else who's going to be listening to this afterwards?
That's so great. I love that. Well, I mean, the thing that you're essentially talking about that you're saying that we're talking about is this whole idea of how do you rewrite your money story?
Yeah.
And what I'm looking at here, what's so important here is how do we take responsibility for our own relationship with money? Because I think there's a way that, I've got my mother's story or my father's story or my whatever, and where it feels a little bit at the mercy of it versus like, what's my story and what do I want my story to be? So some of it is getting conscious even of the fact that we have a story around it that we're silencing and keeping kind of like, we don't want to look at it, we're keeping it in a box. So recognizing we have a story and then recognizing it's our job to rewrite, it's our job to make it look different. And you'd asked me earlier about a story. My mother and my grandmother at one point. So there was a time in my youth when I remember waking up in the middle of the night and I could hear my parents' voices raised. And so the first thing I thought was like, oh, like are they having an argument or are they, what's going on? And I think in a lot of families, the arguments, in couples and relationships, the arguments are about money and how we spend money and what do we do with money and all that stuff. So I think at some level I was like anxious, like, is that what's going on here? Are they having an argument around money? And I woke up and I went down and I listened more carefully and I realized that what they were doing was actually getting excited about an opportunity. And the opportunity was for my mother and my grandmother to go into business buying some rental properties that they could then rent out to the students at the university. And the excitement and the possibility and the kind of magic in them coming together and talking about it, like I got to watch this moment in time where my mother, was stepping into being an entrepreneur. Something that wouldn't even been available a generation earlier, with my grandmother, these two women in my life becoming entrepreneurs in this powerful way, creating her own stream of income and money. I mean, it was powerful, a powerful moment. And, that's an example of them, not consciously, they weren't planning to or trying to, like we'll be doing in the Mastermind Group, but them, creating a new story around money. And of course, it created a different story for me around money. Like this was a part of when I was shifting from being, last to the big time, like being afraid that we didn't have the last to the big time spender story to one where it's like, oh, actually, I can create the life I want with money and through money and, et cetera. And so there was a transition moment there for me. And I think the point is that everybody needs to find the way to rewrite that story. Now, some people will have role models that works for, and some people will not have role models. So if you don't have a role model in your life that can show you a different way of being with money, how do you go about choosing a role model, somebody either in your immediate life that has done this powerfully or somebody out in the world that has come from nothing and created something? Oprah is obviously a glowing example of that. But to actually get conscious about it, get intentional around it, and choose a different way to be around money. And that, as I was saying, that is some of what we're going to be doing in the program that launches at the end of May, or not launches, that's when it goes live, end of May. But, people can start doing that now, right? That don't need to wait for a program to start getting conscious and intentional about how you relate to money and then choosing how you want it to be. I talked a lot there. I got all excited. I was like,
I know, right? We get all excited about things. Okay. So, let me pull you back. So the couple things that I heard, Signy, around if we're going to change our story around money, there's the awareness that there's a story. I think for me, that's the first thing that jumps out is that idea of we need to even just become aware that we have a story running in our heads about our relationship with money. And it's like that little, those angels angels and devils that are supposed to sit right here. We have to, I guess, one, just even be aware that it's there and it's impacting the choices that we make. The other thing that you said was kind of once you're just aware that there's a story, there's also so what is it? Like, what is the story that I'm telling myself? And then the third thing that I heard was the part about, so then once you know that it's there and you know what your story is, pick a role model. So sometimes we have people in our lives, our parents who have been great role models. Sometimes we need to stretch beyond that. Maybe we've got friends colleagues, people, you know, who are in our culture, our society that we can look to. Anything else I need to know?
So, well, yeah, I would have one little place in there when you said, realize that we have a story, figure out what that story is, decide if we like it or not. Because there's a choice point in there, like deciding intentionally, powerfully saying, this story isn't serving me. I'm going to choose something different. And then at that moment, looking to where do I want to pick?
Nice.
From the, you know, kind of the range that's out there. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's, as you said, maybe it's somebody who's been successful in the world, whatever that looks like, our culture or society, but it's like, make the choice, because that's a powerful act in and of itself that changes from here to here.
Okay. Signy, I have so many questions, and I feel like we're going to need to do a part 2. I feel like we're going to have to do a part 2 of this, but maybe, Signy, why don't you finish us off by telling like any sort of last words of wisdom, or like if we remember nothing else from this talk or nothing else from this conversation, what's the one thing you hope that people are walking away with?
That's such a great, there were 2 questions in there. The first thing you started saying, like, I can't remember what you said, but it reminded me of one thing that I had wanted to say before we get to what's the one thing. So a thing that I want to say before we move to completion is looking at this whole idea of the difference between managing money and generating money. Because I hear the story about like a lot of people when they were kids, or people now with their kids, are teaching their kids how to effectively manage money. And that's such an important lesson, something that, you know, not everybody does. And so it's really valuable to have your kids be thinking about, like, you know, how do I want to manage the money? Like, do I put it in the bank? Do I spend it? What do I spend it on? Et cetera. That's very different than generating money. And I don't think a lot of folks are talking to their kids, or, you know, have had a clean experience in their own life of how do I generate money? So many people are used to like, oh, you get a job, they deposit money in your bank every 2 weeks, this is how it goes. And I am grateful to them and kind of, not trapped by them, but like the relationship is such that you're dependent on them. That's a better word. And so you're dependent on them versus generating money. There's so many ways to generate money that are so much broader. It's back to like, oh, I get paid by this one company at this one time of, you know, and that's sort of the way it is, versus like, I can create passive income. I can create, you know, other opportunities. And in my family, income came from multiple different sources. And so it was not like there's this one way. And so I learned that there are many ways, and it's finding the way that works best for me in terms of how do I want to generate income, generate money, and generate opportunities. So that's the thing I want to touch on before we go to the what's that one thing I want to make sure people hang on to.
Well, and so here I'm going to ignore my own rules, and we're just going to hang for a moment on this, because maybe I wanted to share my own story a little bit to bring your idea. Is that, so I grew up in a family of, you know, both of my parents were either, I'll call them, you know, were prairie farmers. Right. And so I've got my dad's parents who immigrated to Canada right after World War II, and my mom's family who had been here for a few generations and didn't have very much money at all. Like my mom talks about stories of they didn't have electricity till she was 6. You know, and so that's, you know, you don't hear many of those. And so my parents definitely came from that, you know, you work for every penny that you have, and you save and you save and you save and you work hard. And then, you know, you get an education and you find a job. And so I was very much raised that way. And I don't spend money unless I have it. And I am grateful for all of those lessons. I actually had some great role models. And so I always envisioned my life being like, I will get a job, and I'll hopefully have a pension, and it'll have great benefits. And those things were fantastic. I did that for probably about 10 years, and it served me really, really well. And then this opportunity to be an entrepreneur sort of landed on my lap. And I was like, really? Like, what's it going to look like? And how does that fit in this current system that's working really well for me? And just when you talk about this idea of managing money versus generating money, they are wildly different mindsets, and even a little bit of heart set. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to use it.
It is now.
it is now. And, you know, so fast forward 2 years, my husband and I are both entrepreneurs now, and nobody's got a pension and nobody's got benefits. And we are wildly happy in where we're at right now, with a whole lot of terror every day too. I think as entrepreneurs, you have that. So I just love your distinction between managing money, and there's great value in that, and figuring out what, you don't have to be an entrepreneur to have that generative energy around money. I think you can have that in lots of different roles. So thank you for offering that. That one really speaks to me, and hopefully speaks to other people.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that, and it is a place that we're going to double click on a little bit when I'm in in the Mastermind Group, the Making a Significant Living, the Mastermind Group, and when you said, so moving back to the question that you had about, okay, so what's one thing you want to leave people with? I think the most important thing is this idea about rewriting your story around money. And taking responsibility for your relationship with money, as opposed to, oh, well, it's what got passed down, or, oh, well, that's just the way we see it, or, oh, that's our society's view on money. It's like, no, rewriting your story around money is huge, and it's important. And essentially what underpins all that is you're choosing the mindset you're going to have around money.
Right.
That's what you're doing when you're rewriting it. And the mindset is what's going to change your behavior, is what then going to change your results.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking from that place, you can change the outcomes of your relationship with money by changing how you're looking at money, rewriting the story.
I love it. Signy, I'm entirely thinking about, the story with money. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old right now, and we talk a lot about money in our house. And I just love the idea of taking these concepts and now actually putting them into conversation. It's a conversation that we have in our heads and with ourselves. And then I think it's also a conversation that we need to be having with our families and our children and our friends, so that we can break down some of these societal things around who can talk about money and who we can't, and what's all right and what's not, so that we can just have a way more open and easy relationship.
Yeah. We need that breakthrough. As a society, we need that breakthrough. If, the crisis of 2008 didn't show us that, we need to be in more open dialogue about how we relate to money and how we want to relate to money and what's possible through money. So exactly right. Time to be in a conversation about it.
Time to be. Okay. So Signy, if people want to talk to you more, if they want to learn more, if they want to be like, hey, that mastermind class is up my alley, how do they get in touch with you?
Yep. The easiest way to find out more is on my website, which is www.signywilson.com. Signy is spelled S-I-G-N-Y. That's a way you could suddenly, where is this website? I can't even find it. You got to spell my name right. Okay. Or you can email me, signy@signywilson.com. So again, Signy is S-I-G-N-Y. Ties all into significant living.
Yes. Excellent. Signy, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I'm really looking forward to the next deep dive, the sort of part 2. We'll see. I'd really love to have, I think next we need to talk about women and the stories that we tell ourselves about money. I think some of it's the same as what we heard today, and I think there's actually some more that I'd love to talk about. So appreciate your time this morning.
Yes, thank you so much. It is always amazing to talk to you. I look forward to next time.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care.